I found the photographs by accident, buried in a box of estate sale junk I bought for $3 in Wheeling, West Virginia. 12 black and white photos, edges brown with age, showing a town that shouldn't exist. Houses with blank walls where windows should be. Streets empty at noon, and in one photo, barely visible in the corner, something that made my hands shake when I noticed it. A pale face pressed against the inside of a wall, mouth open in what might have been a scream. The photos were dated 1940, and on the back of one, someone had written in faded pencil, "Harrows Bend, may God forgive us." I'm a historian specializing in Appalachian settlements, and I'd never heard of Harrows Bend. That alone was strange. I've catalogued hundreds of coal towns, logging camps, and mountain communities across West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. But Harrows Bend, nothing. No census records, no incorporation papers, no mention in any county archive. It took me 3 months to find someone who would talk about it. His name was Earl Hutchins, and he was 94 years old when I met him in a nursing home outside Charleston. The moment I showed him the photographs, his face went white. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, trembled as he pushed them back across the table toward me. "You should burn those," he said. "Burn them and forget you ever saw them." But I wouldn't. I couldn't. And after an hour of gentle persuasion and a promise that I'd never use his full name, Earl finally told me the story. What follows is based on his account, cross-referenced with what little documentation I could find, and filled in with testimony from 2 other survivors I eventually tracked down. This is the story of Harrows Bend, and why every house in that town had no windows. The town was founded in 1923 by the Harrow Mining Company, a mid-sized coal operation run by a man named Silas Harrow. Unlike the big companies that dominated the region, Harrow was a local boy, born in these mountains, and he promised his workers something different. Fair wages, good housing, a real community, not just a company town where the mine owned your soul along with your labor. For the first few years, Harrows Bend was exactly that. The company built sturdy houses, a school, a church, and a general store. The mine produced good coal, the men earned decent pay, and families came from all over the region to settle there. By 1930, the town had nearly 400 residents. Earl's family moved there in 1928 when he was 2 years old. His father worked as a loader, his mother took in laundry, and they lived in a small house on Maple Street with windows that looked out over the mountains. He remembered those early years as happy ones. The town had baseball games on Sundays, dances at the community hall, and enough children that the school had 3 teachers. But then 1932 came, and with it, the incident. On March 14, 1932, the night shift was working deep in shaft number 3, following a vein of coal that ran almost vertical into the mountain. 27 men were down there when they broke through into something that wasn't supposed to exist. A cavity. A massive underground chamber that their lamps couldn't find the edges of, and it wasn't empty. The foreman, a man named Dutch Keller, was the first one to see them. That's what he said when they brought him up anyway, before he stopped talking altogether. He'd pointed his lamp into that darkness and seen them moving. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Pale things with too many joints in their arms and legs, crawling over each other like maggots in meat. The miners ran. All 27 of them dropped their tools and ran for the elevator. But something followed them out. Now here's where I need to pause and address what you're probably thinking. This sounds like folklore, right? Mountain superstition. The kind of story Appalachian people tell to scare outsiders. I thought the same thing when Earl first told me, but Earl wasn't telling a ghost story. His hands shook with real fear, and his eyes held the kind of haunted look you only get from witnessing something that breaks your understanding of the world. And more importantly, what happened next is documented. Not the creatures themselves, but the consequences. Those are real. Those are in the records if you know where to look. The night of March 14th, 3 miners didn't make it home. They were found the next morning outside their houses, dead. No marks on them, no signs of violence, but their eyes were open, and according to the doctor who examined them, their pupils were dilated so wide there was barely any color left. Like they died looking at something so terrible, their eyes tried to swallow all the light they could in their final moments. The company closed Shaft 3 immediately. They sealed it with concrete and posted guards. Silas Harrow himself came down from his office in Charleston and met with the miners. What he told them, I don't know. But after that meeting, every miner who'd been on that shift signed a document. I found a reference to it in a lawyer's notes, though the document itself is long gone, promising never to speak about what they'd seen. For 2 weeks, everything seemed normal. The mine kept operating using the other shafts. The town went about its business, but people noticed things, small things at first. Dogs wouldn't go near Shaft 3. They'd bark and growl if you tried to walk them past it. Birds stopped landing on the buildings nearby, and at night, if you were quiet, you could hear something. A scratching sound, like fingernails on stone, coming from deep underground. Then the children started having the same nightmare. Earl remembered this part vividly. He was 6 years old, and one morning he came down to breakfast crying because of a terrible dream. He'd dreamed that something was watching him through his window, something pale with black eyes that wanted to come inside. His mother comforted him, told him it was just a dream. But then the neighbors' children came over, and they'd had the same dream. And the children at school. Within 3 days, every child in Harrows Bend, under the age of 12, was having the identical nightmare. Something watching them through their windows. Something that wanted to come in. The adults tried to rationalize it. Children talk to each other, they said. One child has a nightmare, tells their friends, and suddenly it spreads. Mass hysteria. It happens. But then the sleepwalking started. The first case was little Sarah Pritchard, 7 years old. Her parents found her at 2 in the morning, standing at her bedroom window, palms pressed against the glass, absolutely still. When they touched her, she turned around and her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing them. She was looking at something else, something behind them, and she whispered, "They want us to let them in." Her parents got her back to bed, and in the morning, she didn't remember any of it. But the next night, it happened again. And this time, 3 other children in town did the same thing, all standing at their windows, all whispering the same thing. They want us to let them in. This is where Silas Harrow made his first real mistake, though at the time, nobody would have called it that. He brought in a doctor from Charleston, a psychiatrist named Dr. Philip Rothman, to examine the children. Dr. Rothman spent a week in Harrows Bend, interviewing families, observing the children, and trying to find a rational explanation. His conclusion was that the town was experiencing a collective delusion, triggered by the mining accident and exacerbated by the isolation of mountain life. He recommended fresh air, exercise, and limiting the children's exposure to talk about the incident. He prescribed sedatives for the worst cases and told the parents not to worry. Then Dr. Rothman went back to Charleston, and 2 days later, the first child vanished. Tommy Breslin, age 9. His mother put him to bed at 8 p.m. and checked on him at 10. He was gone. The window was open, though she swore she'd locked it. They searched all night, the whole town turning out with lanterns and calling his name. They found him at dawn, standing in front of the sealed entrance to Shaft 3. He was fine, unharmed, but when they asked him what happened, how he got there, he just stared at them and said he didn't remember leaving his bed. He said he dreamed he was flying. Over the next week, 4 more children disappeared from their beds and turned up at the sealed shaft. Always at dawn, always with no memory of leaving, and always with the same story about dreaming they could fly. The town was terrified. Parents started sleeping in their children's rooms. They nailed windows shut, they put bells on bedroom doors. But it didn't matter. The children kept disappearing. Not every night, and not every child, but enough that nobody slept soundly anymore. Then came April 3rd, 1932, the night everything changed. 11 children disappeared that night. 11. The entire town mobilized before midnight when the first parent discovered an empty bed. They searched everywhere, the woods, the creek, the mine buildings, everywhere. They found all 11 children at Shaft 3, but this time it was different. They weren't standing. They were digging. Using their bare hands, they were trying to claw through the concrete seal. Their fingers were bloody, nails torn off, and they didn't stop even when their parents grabbed them. They fought like animals, screaming and biting, trying to get back to the wall. It took multiple adults to restrain each child, and the things those children screamed, Earl's voice broke when he told me this part. They weren't words any child should know, weren't sounds human throats should make. By morning, the children had calmed down. They were treated for their injuries, bandaged and put to bed. None of them remembered what happened, but now the adults could see something in their eyes, something watching from behind the familiar faces of their sons and daughters. That's when Silas Harrow called a town meeting. 300 people packed into the community hall on April 4, 1932. Harrow stood at the front, and Earl says he looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. He told them the truth. Not all of it. Earl doesn't think Harrow told them everything even then, but enough. The mine had broken into something old, something that had been sealed underground for a reason nobody understood. And now something from that darkness wanted out. It was using the children because children were more susceptible, their minds easier to influence, and it was getting stronger. The question was what to do about it. Someone suggested leaving, just abandoning the town. But Harrow said no, he said it wouldn't matter. Whatever was down there, it had marked the children, formed a connection with them. It would follow. Distance wouldn't break it. The only solution was to sever the connection at its source. Light, whatever these things were, they came from absolute darkness. They'd existed in that underground cavity for God knows how long, and light was poison to them. Not sunlight specifically, artificial light worked too. The problem was the night. When darkness fell, the connection grew stronger. The children became vulnerable. Harrow's solution was radical. If darkness was the problem, they'd eliminate darkness. The town would run on 24-hour lighting. Every street lamp would stay lit all night. Every house would keep its lights on from dusk to dawn. And most crucially, there would be no more windows. This part confused me when Earl first explained it, and I had to have him go over it twice. The logic was this: windows were the weak points. The children were drawn to windows because that's where inside met outside, where the darkness pressed against the light. The things underground used the windows as focal points, as channels for their influence. If there were no windows, there would be no meeting point between the darkness outside and the light inside. The houses would become sealed boxes of light, impenetrable to the influence from below. It sounds insane, and the people in that hall knew it was insane. But what choice did they have? More children disappeared every night, and now some weren't coming back the same. Parents could see the difference, could see something else looking out through their children's eyes. Harrow gave them 24 hours to decide. He'd already ordered lumber and bricks from Charleston. If they agreed, work would begin immediately. Every window in every house would be sealed. They'd install electric lights, expensive, but the company would pay. They'd wire the whole town for constant illumination. The vote was nearly unanimous. 300 people voted yes. Only 2 voted no, and they left town the next morning. The work began on April 6, 1932. Harrow brought in construction crews from outside, men who didn't ask questions because they were being paid double wages. In 10 days, they sealed every window in Harrow's Bend, boarded them from the outside, then bricked over them, painted the bricks to match the walls. Earl remembers watching the workers cover his bedroom window. He was 7 years old, and he cried because he'd liked looking at the mountains. His mother held him and told him it was temporary, just until they figured out a better solution. She was lying, but parents do that sometimes to protect their children. It's a small mercy, even when the truth is inevitable. The lights were installed next, street lamps every 50 feet, floodlights on every building, and inside each house, enough lamps to ensure no corner stayed dark. The power plant, which had previously only run during the day, was converted to 24-hour operation. They brought in extra coal, hired additional workers, and from April 16, 1932 onward, Harrow's Bend never knew true darkness again. And it worked. For 3 weeks, it actually worked. The children stopped sleepwalking. The nightmares faded. People began to hope that maybe they'd found a solution. Maybe they could actually live like this, in their windowless houses under perpetual light, and the things underground would give up and leave them alone. But here's something I've learned in my years studying Appalachian history. The mountains don't give up, and neither does anything that lives in them. The first sign that things weren't over came in early May. People started noticing that the electric lights would flicker. Just for a second, just a brief dimming, but it was happening more frequently. The power plant operators checked everything. The generators, the fuel supply, the wiring. Everything was fine. The flickers couldn't be explained. Then people noticed the sounds. Inside the walls, scratching, tapping, like something was moving through the space between the interior walls and the bricked-over windows. Earl's father got a hammer one night and knocked a hole in their living room wall to check. There was nothing there, just empty space and the brick exterior. But the sounds continued, and they were getting louder. By mid-May, you could hear them all over town. Every house had them. The scratching, the tapping. And sometimes, if you pressed your ear to the wall where a window used to be, you could hear something else. Breathing, slow and deep and patient. The children started acting strange again. Not like before, they weren't sleepwalking or disappearing, but they'd stand next to the sealed windows and tilt their heads like they were listening to something. When their parents asked what they were doing, they'd say they were trying to hear the song. What song? The pretty song, they'd say, the one coming from the walls. None of the adults could hear any song, just the scratching and the breathing. But every child in town insisted there was music coming from the sealed windows. Beautiful music that made them feel happy and sleepy and safe. This is when I should point out something important about what was happening in Harrows Bend. A lot of people, when I tell them this story, want to categorize it. They want to call it supernatural or paranormal, to file it away in some mental folder labeled impossible things. But the people living through it didn't have that luxury. For them, this was just reality. Terrible, incomprehensible reality. And that's what makes Appalachian horror different from other kinds of scary stories. It's not about ghosts or monsters, it's about the land itself being hostile. About scratching out an existence in a place that doesn't want you there. Where the mountains hold secrets that humans were never meant to discover. The people of Harrows Bend weren't characters in a story. They were real people trying to protect their families with the tools they had. And when those tools stopped working, they had to make harder choices. Silas Harrow made the next choice on May 22, 1932. He announced that all children under the age of 12 would be moved out of Harrows Bend. They'd be sent to stay with relatives in other towns, or if there were no relatives, the company would pay for boarding schools. It was temporary, he said, just until they could find a permanent solution. The parents resisted at first. Appalachian families don't separate easily. But the children were getting worse. The song they heard was getting louder, they said. More beautiful, and some of them had started pressing their faces against the walls where the windows used to be, standing there for hours, smiling. One mother found her daughter trying to eat the wall, just gnawing at the plaster with her teeth, desperate to get through to whatever was on the other side. So they agreed. On May 30th, 1932, 73 children were loaded onto buses and taken away from Harrows Bend. Earl was one of them. He was sent to stay with his aunt in Beckley, 70 miles away. He didn't see his parents again for 6 months. What happened in Harrows Bend after the children left, Earl learned from his father later. And from the other survivors I tracked down, who filled in the gaps. For a few days, things were quiet. The scratching in the walls continued, but without the children there, it seemed less urgent, less insistent. People started to think maybe this was the answer. Keep the children away, keep the lights on, and just wait it out. Then the lights started failing. Not flickering now, actually failing. Bulbs burning out, faster than they should, faster than was possible. A fresh bulb would be installed and last maybe an hour before going dark. The power plant was running at full capacity, but they couldn't keep up with the demand for replacements. By mid-June, parts of the town were going dark for hours at a time. The workers would scramble to replace bulbs, to fix wiring, but it was like fighting a losing battle against something that was learning how to break their defenses. And when the darkness came, things came with it. People started disappearing. Not children now, adults. They'd be there one moment and then the lights would fail, and when they came back on, someone would be gone. Sometimes they'd turn up later, wandering in the woods with no memory of leaving, but sometimes they didn't turn up at all. Harrows Bend was dying. People started leaving despite Harrow's pleas to stay. Whole families would pack up in the middle of the day and drive away. By July, the population had dropped from 400 to fewer than 200. That's when Silas Harrow disappeared. On July 15, 1932, he went down into the sealed shaft 3 with 6 armed guards. He'd told people he was going to end this. He was going to go down there and confront whatever was in that cavity, and either he'd find a way to stop it, or he'd seal it from the inside. None of them came back up. The remaining townspeople sealed the elevator shaft with concrete. They didn't have a choice. Whatever was down there had Harrow now, and they couldn't risk it using him to get out. Without Harrow, the company collapsed. The mine closed officially on August 1st, 1932. The power plant shut down 3 days later, and when the lights finally went out in Harrow's Bend, the remaining residents fled. Within a week, the town was empty. Earl's father came to Beckley to get him in September. His mother wasn't with him, and Earl learned not to ask why. Some questions don't have answers you want to hear. They moved to Ohio, changed their last name, and Earl's father never spoke about Harrow's Bend again until the day he died. But that's not the end of the story. In 1935, a state surveyor doing mineral assessments in the area tried to find Harrow's Bend. It was on his maps, but when he got to where it should have been, there was nothing. No buildings, no roads, just forest, like the town had never existed. Except it had. There were photographs, records. Earl existed and remembered living there, but the physical town was gone, not destroyed. Gone. Like something had reached up from underground and pulled it down into the earth, swallowing every trace. I tried to find the location myself. I had Earl's descriptions, old mining maps, everything I could gather. I spent a week hiking through those mountains. And I found something. There's a valley that fits the description. And if you know what to look for, you can see the depressions in the ground where buildings might have stood. But there's something wrong with that valley. The trees don't grow right. They're twisted, bent at angles, like they're trying to grow away from something. And there are no animals, no birds, no deer, not even insects. And if you go there at night, which I did once because I'm a historian and historians do stupid things in pursuit of knowledge, you can hear them. The scratching sounds, coming from underground, getting louder. I didn't stay long. Now I know what you're thinking. You want me to explain this. You want the rational explanation that makes sense of everything. But here's the thing about Appalachian horror. It doesn't always explain itself. The mountains have been here for 480 million years. Humans have been here for maybe 10,000. We're the newcomers, and sometimes we dig into places we shouldn't, break into chambers that were sealed for good reason, and let out things that should have stayed buried. The people of Harrow's Bend tried to fight back with the tools they had. They sealed their windows and kept the lights burning, because light was the only weapon they could think of. And maybe it worked for a while, but you can't keep the lights on forever. You can't seal yourself away from darkness permanently. Eventually the power fails. Eventually the walls come down. And when they do, the darkness comes in. I think about those photographs sometimes, about the windowless houses and empty streets, about the children sent away and the parents who stayed behind, about Silas Harrow descending into that darkness with his guards thinking he could confront something that had been waiting in the earth since before humans had fire. The hubris of it, the desperate, terrified hubris of thinking we can control things we don't understand. Here's what I've concluded after years of research. Harrow's Bend sealed its windows because the windows were the thin places, the boundaries between the world we know and the world beneath. The things underground, whatever they were, wherever they came from, they needed those boundaries. They fed on them, used them to reach through into our reality. By eliminating the windows, the town thought they were protecting themselves. But really, they were just prolonging the inevitable. Because you can't eliminate all the boundaries. There's always darkness somewhere. Always a thin place where the underneath can press through. The real horror of Harrow's Bend isn't what was underground. It's what the people had to become to fight it. They had to seal themselves into boxes of light, had to send their children away, had to watch their neighbors disappear one by one. They had to make choices no one should have to make, and in the end, those choices weren't enough. That's Appalachian horror in its purest form. Not monsters jumping out from shadows, but the slow realization that the ground beneath your feet isn't solid, that the mountains you call home are older and stranger than you imagined, that sometimes when you dig for coal or timber or whatever treasure you think the land is hiding, You dig too deep and find something looking back at you. Earl Hutchins died 3 months after I interviewed him. He was 94 years old, and according to his nurses, he was peaceful at the end. But the night before he died, he told them he could hear music. Beautiful music coming from the walls. He said it sounded like home. I still have those photographs. I've shown them to other historians, to researchers, to anyone who might be able to help me understand what really happened in Harrows Bend. Most of them think it's an elaborate hoax, some kind of Depression-era art project or a doctored set of images. But I know what I found in that valley. I know what I heard in the darkness, and I know that somewhere in the mountains of West Virginia, there's a place where the ground is hollow and something old is still scratching at the walls trying to get out. The Harrow Mining Company's records were destroyed in a fire in 1951. Convenient, right? But I found one document that survived, filed away in a county clerk's office under a misspelled name. It was a letter from Silas Harrow to his lawyer, dated March 15, 1932, the day after the incident in Shaft 3. The letter was brief. It said, "We found the door. God help us, we opened it. Now I don't know how to close it again." That's what Harrows Bend was really about, not windows or darkness or lights burning through the night. It was about a door that should have stayed closed, and once you open certain doors, you can't ever really shut them again. You can only try to keep what's on the other side from coming through. The windowless houses were just one attempt, one desperate, doomed attempt to seal themselves away from what they'd released, and when that failed, when the lights finally went out, and the darkness came flooding in, the town itself became the sacrifice. The whole place pulled down into the earth as a final seal, a last attempt to contain what couldn't be controlled. I think about the children sometimes, the ones who were sent away. Earl was one of the lucky ones. He got old, had a family, lived a full life. But he never went back to the mountains. None of the survivors I found did. They'd scattered across the country, changed their names, built new lives far from Appalachia. But they all heard it eventually, the music from the walls, the beautiful, terrible song that promised if they'd just come home, if they'd just come back to the mountains, everything would be wonderful, everything would make sense. Earl told me he'd hear it in his dreams. He'd be 7 years old again, standing in his windowless bedroom, and he'd press his ear against the wall where the window used to be. And he'd hear them singing, not words exactly, but he understood the meaning. They were calling him home, back to Harrows Bend, back to the darkness. He never went, he was strong enough to resist, but he said he knew others who hadn't been. Other children who'd been sent away in 1932 and who'd disappeared years later, presumably trying to find their way back to a town that no longer existed. I wonder what they found when they got there. If they got there. I wonder if they're still down in that valley, wandering through the twisted trees, listening to the scratching from underground and thinking it sounds like home. There's an educational aspect to this story that I think is important. Appalachian people have long been stereotyped as superstitious, backwards, afraid of progress. But what happened in Harrows Bend wasn't about superstition. It was about a community facing something genuinely incomprehensible and trying to solve it with logic and reason. They didn't turn to folk magic or mountain mysticism. They used electricity and modern construction techniques. They made decisions based on observation and experimentation. When darkness seemed to be the problem, they eliminated darkness. When windows appeared to be the weak points, they sealed them. It didn't work, but not because they were foolish or superstitious. It didn't work because some problems don't have solutions. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. And that's a harder truth than any ghost story. The coal industry in Appalachia has a long history of treating the mountains as something to be conquered and exploited. Companies would dig anywhere, drill anywhere, blast anywhere there might be profit. They didn't care what they destroyed or what they might disturb. The land and the people on it were just resources to be extracted. Harrows Bend is what happens when that extraction goes too far. When you dig so deep into the bones of the mountains that you crack something fundamental. Something that was sleeping or sealed or simply waiting. And then the full weight of that arrogance comes crashing down on the heads of ordinary people just trying to make a living. Silas Harrow thought he was different. He thought because he was local, Because he understood these mountains, he could do it better, more safely. But the mountains don't care where you're from. They don't care about your good intentions. You dig into them, you crack them open, and whatever comes out is your responsibility. I think Harrow knew that at the end. That's why he went down into Shaft 3. Not because he thought he could win, but because he knew he owed it to his town to try, to face what he'd released and pay the price for his mistake. It wasn't enough. It's never enough. But it was something. The thing that haunts me most about this story isn't the creatures in the darkness, or the windowless houses, or even the children being sent away. It's the normalcy of it all in between the horror. Life in Harrows Bend continued even after the windows were sealed. People went to work, they cooked dinner, they gossiped and argued and fell in love. They celebrated birthdays and mourned deaths. Because that's what people do. We adapt. We normalize even the abnormal because the alternative is madness. The residents of Harrows Bend lived in their sealed boxes of light, and after a while, it probably started to feel normal. You can get used to anything if you have to. Until you can't anymore. Until the thing you're trying to normalize finally breaks through whatever psychological barriers you've built, and you have to face the reality that your life isn't normal and never will be again. That's when people started leaving. Not when the windows were first sealed, but months later when they realized this was permanent. This was their life now, windowless houses and burning lights and the constant scratching in the walls. No more sunrises, no more views of the mountains, no more connection to the world outside their electrified boxes. And for what? To keep something at bay that was patient enough to wait them out. That was learning from their defenses and finding new ways through. That would ultimately win because it had time, and they didn't. I've read a lot about Depression-era America, about the desperation and poverty and how people clung to any promise of work, any chance at stability. The residents of Harrows Bend could have left earlier. They could have abandoned the town the moment children started sleepwalking. But they didn't, because leaving meant giving up their jobs, their homes, their whole lives. This is the trap of company towns. You tie people's survival to a single industry, a single location, and then when that place becomes dangerous or toxic or literally haunted, they can't leave. Or they feel like they can't. The economic chains are just as real as physical ones. Harrows Bend is an extreme example, but the pattern repeats throughout Appalachian history. Towns built around mines or mills that poison the water or fill the air with toxins. And people stay because where else can they go? What else can they do? Their skills are tied to this industry, their families have been here for generations, and the company owns everything, including the stores where they buy food. The horror of Harrows Bend isn't separate from its economics, it's part of the same system. A system that puts people in impossible positions and then blames them when they make desperate choices. I'm not saying the things underground were a metaphor for capitalism or industrialization. They were real. The survivors are clear about that. But the reason the town couldn't respond effectively, the reason people stayed until it was too late, the reason children were the most vulnerable, all of that ties back to the social and economic structure of company towns. Silas Harrow built a better company town than most. Fair wages, good housing, real investment in the community. But he still built a company town. He still owned everything. He still made the decisions. And when things went wrong, that concentration of power meant there was no democratic process, no public oversight, no way for ordinary residents to take control of their own fate. They had to trust Harrow. They had to believe he knew what he was doing. And when he didn't, when he went down into the darkness and never came back, the whole structure collapsed. There's a lesson there about power and responsibility, and what happens when both are concentrated in the hands of too few people. But I don't think the people of Harrows Bend needed that lesson. They lived it. They died from it. The photographs I found show a town frozen in a moment of desperate adaptation. Windowless houses standing in broad daylight, looking almost normal except for the blank walls. You can see clotheslines in some photos. Gardens. A bicycle leaning against a porch. Signs of ordinary life continuing in extraordinary circumstances. But look closer at those images and you start to see the details that reveal the truth. The way the shadows fall wrong because there are too many light sources, The lack of any people, even though these were clearly taken during the day. And in that one photo, the one with the face pressed against the inside of a wall, you can see the fingers too, splayed out on either side of the face. Too many fingers, too many joints. I had that photograph analyzed by an image forensics expert. He said it hadn't been doctored. Whatever was in that photo was really there when the picture was taken. He also said he'd prefer not to look at it again, and he'd appreciate it if I didn't tell anyone he'd examined it. I understood. Some knowledge carries a weight. Once you've seen certain things, you can't unsee them. And you start to wonder what else might be hiding in the shadows just outside our perception. The other survivors I found, beyond Earl, were Sarah Pritchard, the first child who'd sleepwalked to her window, and James Keller, the son of Dutch Keller, the foreman who'd first seen into the cavity. Both were in their 90s when I tracked them down. Both refused to talk to me at first. Sarah eventually agreed to a brief phone conversation. She told me she didn't remember much from Harrow's Bend, just fragments, the music in the walls, the way her room felt safer with the window sealed, but also more like a tomb. The morning they put her on the bus, and her mother cried like she was never going to see her again. She was right, as it turned out. Sarah's mother was one of the people who disappeared in July 1932. James Keller wouldn't talk to me at all, but his daughter did. She said her father had nightmares his whole life, dreams about darkness and things with too many joints. He'd told her once, when he was very old and the barriers between present and past had worn thin, that his father had come home different after Shaft 3, that something had looked out through Dutch Keller's eyes that wasn't entirely him anymore. Dutch was one of the men who went down into the sealed shaft with Silas Harrow in July. James said he thought his father went willingly, that maybe part of him wanted to go back down there, back to the darkness, back to whatever he'd seen in that cavity. There's a theory in psychology about trauma bonding, the way traumatic experiences can create a pull, a fascination with the source of the trauma. Victims of abuse sometimes miss their abusers. Soldiers sometimes want to go back to war. Maybe that's what happened to Dutch Keller. Maybe he'd seen something in that cavity that terrified him, but also called to him. And when Harrow offered a chance to go back, he couldn't refuse. Or maybe it wasn't psychology at all. Maybe the things in the darkness had already marked him, already created a connection, and they were calling him home. I think about Harrow's last words in that letter. We found the door. God help us, we opened it. What door did they find? And how long had it been there? The Appalachian Mountains are ancient. They were formed before trees existed, before animals crawled onto land, before dinosaurs. They've been ground down by time from peaks that might have rivaled the Himalayas to the worn, rounded mountains we see today. And in all that time, in all those millions of years, what might have lived in the deep places? What might have been sealed away in cavities formed when the continents collided and the mountains thrust upward from the earth? I'm a historian, not a geologist or a paleontologist. But I've done my research. I've learned about the strange formations in Appalachian caves, the unmapped cavity systems, the places where nothing lives, where no fungi grow, where the stone has properties that shouldn't exist. There are older things in these mountains than coal, older things than humanity, and most of them are sleeping or dead or sealed away where they can't hurt us. Most of them. But every so often, someone digs too deep, drills in the wrong place, breaks through a wall that was there for a reason, and then we get towns like Harrows Bend, places where the normal rules stop applying, where windows become dangerous and darkness becomes alive, and the only solution is to abandon everything and hope that sealing it all away will be enough. It usually is. Usually. The earth is good at swallowing secrets, at pulling mistakes back down into the deep and covering them over with time and forest and forgetting. But the scratching continues. In that valley where Harrows Bend used to be, if you listen carefully on a quiet night, you can hear it. The patient, persistent sound of something trying to get out, something that knows the seal won't last forever, that eventually someone else will dig in the wrong place, or the earth will shift, or the door will crack open again. And when it does, there might not be time to seal the windows. I've been asked why I'm telling this story, if Harrows Bend was covered up, if the survivors changed their names and scattered, if even the town itself was erased from the earth. Why am I dragging it back into the light? Because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know what happened so that if it happens again, we don't waste time trying the same solutions. The windowless houses didn't work. The perpetual lights didn't work. Running didn't work. The only thing that worked was complete sacrifice. The town itself pulled down into the earth as a seal. And that wasn't a victory, that was a horrific last resort that cost hundreds of lives. If there are other doors in these mountains, other cavities that miners might break into, people need to know what they're risking. They need to know that some darkness can't be fought with light alone, that some things underground should stay underground. The coal industry is still active in Appalachia. They're still digging, still drilling, still blasting their way through ancient stone. And most of the time, it's fine. They find coal or natural gas or whatever they're looking for, they extract it, and nothing terrible happens. But every so often, there are accidents that don't make sense. Cave-ins in stable areas, equipment failures with no explanation, workers who disappear or come back different. These things get written off as bad luck or human error, or just the inherent dangers of mining. Maybe that's all they are. Probably that's all they are, but maybe not. Maybe some of those accidents are because someone drilled in the wrong place, found a cavity that wasn't on any map, let something out that should have stayed sealed. And if that happens, the people on the ground need to know that sealing windows won't be enough, that they need to evacuate immediately, that they need to seal the breach and then get as far away as possible and never go back. The people of Harrows Bend didn't have that knowledge. They tried to fight, they tried to adapt, they tried to keep their community alive even as it was being consumed from below. And they failed. Not because they were weak or stupid, but because they didn't understand what they were fighting until it was too late. I'm telling this story so the next town has a chance. So someone, somewhere, will read this and recognize the signs. The children's nightmares, the scratching in the walls, the feeling that darkness has weight and intention, and they'll know to run before it's too late. That's the real horror of Harrows Bend. Not what happened, but what could happen again. What might be happening right now in some mountain town where people are experiencing strange things and dismissing them as coincidence or stress or mass hysteria. Because the darkness is patient. It's been waiting in the earth for millions of years. It can wait a little longer. And when the next door opens, it'll be ready. Earl's last words to me, before I left him in that nursing home for the final time, were these: "The music never really stops. You just get better at not listening. But it's always there, at the edge of hearing, calling you home. And the worst part is, sometimes I want to go. Sometimes I think about finding my way back to that valley and just walking into the woods and letting it take me. Because at least then the waiting would be over." He died 3 months later at 94 in his bed, surrounded by family. A good death as deaths go. But I wonder in those final moments what he heard. If the music got louder as the boundaries thinned, if something was waiting on the other side to welcome him home. I hope not. I hope Earl Hutchins got the peace he deserved after carrying the weight of Harrows Bend for 88 years. But I don't know, and not knowing is its own kind of horror. The photographs sit in a locked drawer in my office. I don't look at them often, but sometimes, late at night, when I'm working on research, I'll hear a sound, a scratching, just for a moment, just at the edge of perception. And I'll wonder if bringing these photos into my space, into my home, was a mistake. If I've created my own thin place, my own boundary between the world I know and the world beneath. Then the sound stops, and I tell myself it was just the house settling, just the building cooling, just ordinary sounds made sinister by knowledge of what else scratching can mean. But I've started sleeping with the lights on, just in case. That's the real legacy of Harrows Bend, not the town itself, which is gone, but the fear it left behind. The knowledge that beneath our feet, beneath the familiar, comfortable surface of the world, there are vast spaces filled with things we don't understand. And every foundation we dig, every mine shaft we sink, every well we drill is another chance to break through into somewhere we were never meant to go. The windowless houses were a symptom, not the disease. They were what happened when people tried to fight the impossible with the tools they had. And they failed, as humans always fail when we try to contain things that don't fit in our categories of possible and impossible. But we keep trying, because that's what we do. We dig and build and modify and adapt, convinced that human ingenuity can solve any problem. And mostly we're right. Mostly our solutions work, except when they don't, except when we dig too deep and find the door, and then no amount of ingenuity will save us. Then the best we can hope for is that the earth is merciful enough to swallow our mistakes before they spread. Harrows Bend got that mercy. The town was pulled down into the earth, the survivors scattered, the records destroyed or lost. Within a generation, it was as if the place had never existed. The perfect cover-up, not through human conspiracy, but through the land itself erasing evidence of what happened there. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe some stories shouldn't be preserved, maybe some knowledge is too dangerous to spread. But I'm a historian. Preservation is what I do. And I think people deserve to know their history, even the dark parts, especially the dark parts. Because it's in our darkest moments that we reveal our truest selves. How we face the impossible tells us who we are. The people of Harrows Bend faced the impossible with courage and determination and love for their families. They made hard choices. They sacrificed everything, and in the end, it wasn't enough. But they tried. They tried so hard, that deserves to be remembered. So here it is. The story of why every house in a 1940 Appalachian town had no windows. Not because of some quaint architectural tradition, not because of weather or poverty or isolation, but because the people who lived there were trying to seal themselves away from a darkness that had come up from beneath their feet. A darkness that wanted in. That was patient enough to wait and strong enough to eventually win. The windows were sealed in April 1932. By September, the town was empty. By 1935, it was gone entirely. And now, 94 years later, all that remains are some photographs, some scattered survivors who are almost all dead now, and a valley in the West Virginia mountains where the trees grow wrong and nothing lives. And on quiet nights, if you listen carefully, you can hear them. Still scratching, still waiting, still singing their beautiful, terrible song.